As far as the FBI, there have been no more visits, thankfully. But in terms of the surveillance, people are still experiencing a lot of the things we described that were happening in the 90s. People are still getting visits from the FBI and knocks on their door and interviews. So we still feel it, so that's still happening. As far as the documents, they go as far as 2006, and each month I get a CD-ROM with thousands of pages of documents. But the big problem with the file was, even though we won this big court case and we compelled the government to be transparent, they have redacted or like blacked out 70% of the file. So it's extraordinarily frustrating, you know, to like go on this journey. This was like 5 years to make the film. The FOIA battle alone was 2 years, and to still confront this, you know, withholding of disclosure by the government. And so what I'm working on now, my next project with the MIT Open Documentary Lab, is working on an artificial intelligence project that will help predict what might be behind the redactions. And the way we do that is, redactions expire after 40 years. The national security, basically withholdings expire after 40 years. So we have thousands of pages of documents of the FBI surveillance of other communities of color, from Japanese Americans to Black Americans in the United States. And those you can read them fully, right? There are no redactions. So we're using that as part of our data set to sort of guess what's behind the Vulgar Betrayal file. Well, you know, for 2 years I was not making a personal film. 2 years into it, I was interviewing other people about their experiences with surveillance. And then very clearly, it became clear to us that this was a film about a process, and we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know that we would sue the FBI, we didn't know that we would win in the end. And so that we had to document all of that, and that meant I had to be in it. And that was really a struggle, especially as a journalist, pulling myself in front of the camera, but I think it did something amazing because it forced me to think about it personally and not just with this, you know, distance of journalism, and to be an expert in my own experience and own my story in a way that I think I couldn't have if I had just made an investigative film. My mother was the first person on board actually with the film, and she's actually, you know, the star of the film in so many ways. And it took some convincing to convince my siblings. Like, they didn't understand why I wanted to film like dinners and you know, holiday events, and I think when they saw it, they understood how it all came together. That it's a film about an investigation, but it's also about daily life and our joys and you know, the mundaneness of our life in some ways. And so I wanted to show all of that as well. So it took some convincing, but they came on board. And I think it opened up, we just screened it to the community in Chicago 2 weeks ago for the first time, and that was amazing. Like 500 people came out, and it was super emotional, and we had therapists in the room, and the idea is to really frame a conversation around healing. And I think often when we talk about surveillance, we do it in like a civil rights framework or a legal framework, but we don't often talk about trauma and healing. And so we started that kind of conversation in the community, and it was amazing. And we're planning for our impact campaign to go on tour, basically doing screenings in town halls, having these conversations. The rhetoric is heightened, but the policies have been the same through multiple different administrations. So a lot of this surveillance started under Clinton, continued through Bush and Obama, and it still exists today. So the infrastructure is there. And you know, my interest is interrogating like the system of power that props up the possibility for investigations like this to happen and to continue to happen even though they're not actually effective in stopping crime. So what is the point of them? And there's a historical continuum in these investigations of communities of color in the United States. And so I'm really, yeah, so while the times are, the rhetoric is accentuated and it's such a hostile environment, the policies are the same and continue to be very similar. think in the film, my sisters wear hijab. I choose not to wear hijab. People ask me, why do I not wear hijab? Because I don't. I choose not to. Why do my sisters wear hijab? Because they choose to. It's a really super simple answer. And, that doesn't make me less religious than my sisters, or my sisters more religious than me. They just choose to express their religion and their religiosity in a different way. And my sister's a civil rights attorney and, very patriotic in many ways. We criticize our government, and that's also within our responsibility as citizens. I think on to zoom out a little bit, when you say that, it makes me think of the term national security. When I hear the word national security used in the United States, I think of whose security at the expense of whose security. That word is a trigger for me, and it's similar with, blue lights. When we see those in the neighborhood, we don't think, we're going to be protected. We're immediately suspicious because our relationship with law enforcement, the history of our relationship with law enforcement has been this antagonistic one where we're seen as suspects. So that's the polarization of that relationship. So, I was just home when that happened. I don't actually shoot. I have an amazing cinematographer, Sheila Young, from Chicago. But in that moment, this was happening, we weren't sure, but it wasn't actually. We thought it was a hate crime at first. People were really confused about what was happening, so I just took a camera and I started filming, and it's super shaky, which project it's on, but it's also, part of the moment, the fear in this moment and the shakiness of the moment, and I just tried to capture that as it was happening. And to date, I don't have any answers for that. I've emailed the FBI multiple times. They say it's an open investigation. They can't say anything about it. But it's, very emblematic of the relationship law enforcement has with our community, where they can come in and sort of do whatever they want and do something like that and feel like people are never, they don't owe residents an explanation. That's pretty egregious in my opinion. It's really important when you're making a personal film and you're directing and you're in it that you have this super trusting, close relationship with your cinematographer. And I did. I filmed with a few people at first, and then settled on someone. She's a Singaporean American immigrant to Chicago, and an incredible cinematographer. And my mother's house was the hub for our production. And it was also where we were filming all the time, so it was so important that the crew had a great relationship with my mom, because my mom was also cooking for us, providing meals, and she was so instrumental. And then while we were on the investigation, we were always updating her on what happened, we got a letter back from the FBI, or we got an interview with this FBI agent, or someone told us this off the record, and so she was super updated with things. And then we started filming those things, and that became, we had 200 hours of footage. We were filming everything over the, process. But it built, so for 2 years I was filming with Shu Ling, and we built this relationship and trust, and she built the same, trust with my family off camera as well, just hanging around in the house. And it, came to the point that she was just a fly on the wall, but she also really understood what we were looking for. The investigation almost was prime, and then we were just documenting it in some ways. That's how I saw it, and Shu Ling's priorities were probably reversed, but she was very invested in the investigation as well. So she became attuned to what to look for, and there's the crying scene in the film, and I was mic'd, and she was outside filming with my little brother, and then she heard me, starting to have this conversation with my mom, and she kind of very stealthily came into the room and just settled in a corner and shot it, and we saw her there, and we're okay, that's all right, maybe I'll cut it in the edit, let's let her get it. But it became, natural enough to have the camera around, because we never turned it off. Once we started shooting, we shot the entire day, and we had it on all the time, and we shot everything. And at one point, my mom got annoyed. She's is this a cooking show? You guys are always filming cooking. I'm well, you're always cooking. So we have a lot of cooking shots. We could do a little sideshow series. My mom But, that's how it worked with her. And we had she shared the vision really for what we wanted and what a film, that looked like from inside the community looking around, that our community had been shown for such a long time from the outside looking in. So a film on the inside has to look different cinematically, and that's why we're intimately close to people. We're in their kitchens, we're close to people, while the gaze of surveillance is a really distant gaze. It requires a really long distance from the object. So we wanted the opposite of that. And we also wanted to imitate the surveillance gaze. So we really jumped cinematically between these wide lens, surveillance aesthetic gazes was something in the forefront to these really up close and personal images with the people that have always been seen from far away for such a long time. So we also thought really deeply about what would that look like? What does a story from the inside look like? Not just in terms of, the narrative, the counter narrative we're telling, but also cinematically. People would rather not deal with, the trouble, and so they don't donate to charities that they would support, and they support in spirit. They don't, they won't fight to open a mosque, even though they have to drive an hour and a half to the nearest one. So people take a step back, and this is, I think, the most pernicious effect of this surveillance is because it's hard to document what you don't do. It's easier to say it did this and this and this, but it's much harder to say it prevented people from doing this, this, and this. And that's really one of the scariest effects of this, and that's what chilling effect does. It prevents people from organizing, from participating in Muslim student associations at universities because they're afraid to sign up and then their name is on the watch list. And this is the scariest thing. It prevents you from acting, from moving, from participating, from being in community. And so, the reverse of that, the way you empower yourself and you take power back is by doing those things as an act of resistance, by joining organizations, by doing things that you would do, even if you're afraid, doing it anyway because you know it's right and you know you're in the right, and we want to prevent these effects from continuing to chill our communities from organizing for change. So much of it is from my team. It was not a one-person effort. It took a village, really, very much. My family was super supportive, and they helped me when I started trying to mobilize the community to do something. They were the first people that helped me. And I have an amazing producer, my editor, Hajj Yahya, who's amazing, and edited the film. And so many people that were held me through the journey. And I think it's impossible to do something like this alone. It really takes a group effort. And just acknowledge the big team that's behind it.
One thing I'm really interested in is within marginalized groups is from their oppressors is this feeling of there's this theme of microaggressions and gaslighting. I was really interested in, as you as a director and also as an activist and a journalist working in this movie within the 5 years, I kind of saw a theme of that in your in your documentary, when you were presenting the idea of the FBI going to your guys' doors, and it almost seemed like the FBI was trying to gaslight you guys into thinking, oh well, there's people impersonating. Was that a big theme that you were thinking of while you were while you were directing and editing it? Were you thinking about the microaggressions that make marginalized groups feel maybe my point isn't that valid?
That's such a great question. I actually didn't realize it until after I finished the film and I was watching it, and I literally want to write a short novel now called The FBI Invented Gaslighting, because they did. I had multiple off-the-record interviews with FBI agents who didn't want to be recorded, and I met with some senior folks off the record, and every single time they would say things like, you're chasing unicorns, you think you're a Ghostbuster, what you think happened didn't happen, and this is, exaggerated, consistently making me feel like I was crazy. And I really started to feel like I was crazy at a certain point. And this also, I think that visit from the FBI agent was like, I want you to know I'm watching you, you know? And I know where your mom lives, and I can come back there anytime. And that's what that was. It was like an overt threat, in my opinion. And so yeah, so this is a tactic that they use, and they use it to make you think that like, I thought at a certain point it was happening so often that like, maybe I'm onto something. Why are these senior assistant special agent in charge of the FBI telling me, taking time to meet with me in person to tell me I'm crazy, if I'm actually crazy, you know? Why are multiple people doing the same thing? It's like, okay, you know, there's more to it, but you're deep in like the rabbit hole as it is, and you know, when you have these like official seeming people telling you these things, like you want, like weirdly your instinct is to believe it, and then you're like, no, like, I know I'm not crazy, I know I'm not. So that definitely happened a lot, and I doubted myself a lot, but once that letter came saying there were 33,000 pages, I was like, okay, this is it, this is the validation that, like, I'm not crazy, why are there so many pages? Like, what, you know, if this was nothing, if I'm, you know, exaggerating, why are there 33,000 pages of documents? That's wild. And records on 500 people, you know. So, yeah, so that definitely was a thing, and like you internalize it in the moment, and you just keep going, and you try to just keep going, but it's afterwards that you realize, like, wow, you know, so this was so difficult because there were all of these barriers. And because, yeah, I internalized those microaggressions, and in the moment just like rode through. But it's great to have the film and to look back on the process and to say like, wow, look at all these times